Good evening all. Welcome to Macro Talk. It's Tuesday, 8 o'clock in the evening, and well, it's not 8 o'clock in the evening, is it? It's 7:56 in the evening. I wanted to get some of the announcements out of the way early so that we have enough time to cover everything we're going to cover. We're talking tonight about exotic optics, lenses that you don't really think about until you learn about them, and then you want to get one. You can blame me for that later, but yeah, we've got a lot of really cool lenses to talk about tonight, and a lot of interesting facts around why they're so good. We'll get to that in just a second. First, a couple of announcements to make. Thank you to Robert, who called me last week and said, hey, check this auction out. It's in a state near you. They're selling a camera stand, and I don't think they know what they have. Indeed, they didn't know what they had, but they had a Cambo studio stand, which retails for $4,500 on B&H. It looked brand new, and the bidding was at $5. Yeah, I actually ended up winning it this weekend for just under $100. So I'm driving to Wisconsin this week to pick it up, but I wouldn't have seen it had it not been for Robert. So thank you, Robert. Does anybody want to buy a Cambo camera stand for $4,200? I didn't think so. Worth asking, though. Okay, for anybody who is here, who is part of the working group with the AWP Essentials, the project that we're working on, if you are, just be aware of the fact that I've had to cancel this Thursday's meeting because of the previous announcement. I'm actually going to be out of town that day, so we'll have to reschedule. So if you're one of those folks, one of those volunteers, now you know. Sorry about that. We'll reschedule. Okay, this whole week's talking about lenses, by the way. On Thursday, we're going to, instead of looking at 10 of the most ridiculously unaffordable lenses, we're going to look at 10 of the most affordable lenses that are also good. So we'll be talking about the kind of macro lenses that we look at when we first get into macro. So it'll be a lot of fun. That's not the case with today's lenses. These lenses are not for beginners at all. Saturday morning, 10 o'clock, it's After Stack with Bud Parrott and me. I'm not exactly sure what we're talking about. It will be processing of pictures. We just don't know what yet. If you have a picture you want us to look at, work on, and then talk about, please send it to Bud or I as soon as possible. The sooner the better. 3 new books that have blown me away. They are all 3 birthday presents from the same person. They're from Susan, and she has been so wonderful. She's sent me some books in the past, and they've all been good. But these three you're going to want. They are all 3 by the Princeton Press, and you know how macro books tend to be either packed full of good information or packed full of good photographs, but seldom do they have both. These books, all 3 of them, they're the Lives of series. The Lives of Moths, which the photography, the facts are stupendous, but on every page, the photography is breathtaking. Absolutely breathtaking. Some of the full-page prints are superb. It's by Andrei Surikov and Rachel Chad. The Lives of Moths. Coming in a close second, The Lives of Fungi, which equally amazing photography from start to finish. These books cover the lives of fungi and moths all over the world. So it's kind of getting out of your local area a little bit. These aren't field guides, but the best of the best. And that book, by the way, was by Britt Bunyard. Arthur Evans, our very favourite Beatle author, wrote The Lives of Beatles, and this is the most astonishing book for photography, and for just an really interesting, captivating read. It has pages and pages of weevils and pages of tiger beetles. Just amazing. Arthur Evans, The Lives of Beetles. I'll put links in the program description so that you can go get yourself one of these volumes. But they are top notch. Thank you, Susan, so much for expanding the library. It's much appreciated. Okay, a couple of things about tonight. We're going to jump right in now as it's 8 o'clock. And I want to make a couple of things clear at the beginning. I'm not reviewing lenses here. I don't actually own any of the lenses we're talking about, for several reasons, but mostly just the practical ones. But I know people who own all of them. So I know at least one person who owns one of these lenses. So I have lots of experience looking at the pictures and talking about the lenses and reading about them. So there's a lot going on there. Another thing I want to tell you about tonight is that when I started researching, as I do when I do a talk like this and I put together a list of lenses, I'll usually put that list in the large language model, the ChatGPT AI program, and have it review my list. See if there are any additions, any corrections, or if it would change the order of the list, that type of thing. And it'll make recommendations. Sometimes I ignore them, sometimes I follow them. But this time it made a number of recommendations and made more mistakes than I have ever seen in a conversation with ChatGPT before. And it bothered me, and I started cataloging the errors. And I believe I may have found an Achilles heel in using this tool. So if you are a user of AI, and particularly if you use a large language model, especially if you use it at work, I want to tell you about this area of concern that I have so that you can be on the lookout for it. It appears that the errors happen when you're communicating with the AI about similar objects or similar places or situations or similar nouns that have a lot of descriptive elements that don't make linguistic sense. For example, a Rodenstock, Rodagon, S or D, 75 millimeter, and then another number and then another letter, and just a long name like that. If you ask it to put those things in order or make a list of those things, it frequently gets really confused and gets all of the terminology mixed up, puts things in the wrong order, puts the wrong facts with the wrong heading. And it just seems to get worse the deeper you dig into it. So I spent most of today going back over the research I'd done at the weekend and changing it because there were so many mistakes in it. And this is really an eye-opener for me because I use ChatGPT all the time and hardly ever find mistakes. I always check facts, but this was nuts. And it would be in things like I would describe a particular lens. If you haven't delved into the world of industrial lenses, you might not be aware of the fact that for any given lens, there are another 99 lenses with a name that's almost identical to it, that use most of the name is the same and it'll have an extra designator letter on the end, but that makes all the difference in the world. ChatGPT cannot keep that stuff straight and gets them so mixed up, which results in craziness. I think a part of it may be that humans also get mixed up about these lenses, and as a result, much of what is written is inaccurate. And if that's what the AI learned from, then no wonder. But whether it's its own ability to sort out these details, or it's simply parroting back the mistakes that we make, it's a minefield, and I would be very cautious about using it in this kind of situation. So let me see. I'm going to list these lenses in order, but that's going to be the least important part of this discussion. What I really want to talk about is what makes any optic an exotic optic, and how are these lenses different than the lenses that we use. And I want to even talk a little bit about one of the key ways that we can evaluate these lenses, which is using a modular transfer function graph. What that is, what that means, and when you look at it, what does it tell you? That would be the most valuable thing I could give you in this hour, is a good understanding of that. So we will take a little bit of time out to do that. But anyway, that's the background we want to go to. But let me see. I'm trying to think if I should do this now or later. No, I'm going to do it now. What exactly do I mean by exotic optics? I had to define this so that I could make my list. I knew what I meant in my head, but I needed to put it down on paper so that I could describe it to ChatGPT and to you. By exotic, I mean lenses that are relatively or very rare, usually pretty or very expensive, and very often not lenses that we think of as a photographer's lenses, not lenses that are put on a camera to take pictures in the normal sense. So it would cover things like industrial lenses, lenses that are used in the manufacture of printed circuit boards or microchips, where it's having to scan a very large area in excruciating detail looking for errors. Also, it could be in larger lenses. That would be another category that would fit in here. So what I decided to do for the purposes of this discussion was, first of all, I excluded all microscope objectives because that's a whole discussion in itself. And I excluded any lenses that you would be likely to recognize as a camera lens. And there are a few that straddle the exotic and the camera lens worlds. There are a couple of Leica lenses that would fit in that category, but we're just going to ignore them. If they go on a regular camera, forget about it. These are for special uses, and usually they have a very narrow span of usefulness. Oftentimes, they can only be used at one magnification, for example, to get their maximum effect. That makes them a niche lens, and that qualifies them for being in the exotic optics. So if they're rare and expensive and have limited use, but what they do is better than anything else on the planet, that makes it an exotic lens that got on my list. And they're the ones that I'm going to talk about. So one of the terms that is going to come up again and again, and if you don't understand the term, it will confuse the heck out of you. It's diffraction limited. You may have heard this term when an objective or a lens is described as diffraction limited. That sounds like a negative term, doesn't it? It sounds like, well, this is a very nice lens, except it's limited by how much diffraction it has. That is not what this means. In fact, it means completely the opposite. What it means is the lens is only limited by diffraction, and diffraction is not a function of a lens. Diffraction is a physical property that results from light passing through a hole. That's when diffraction happens, and that is the same for every lens. It's the same for no lens at all. For just a hole in the wall will have diffraction. So if you say that a lens is diffraction limited, the saying should be only diffraction limited. It means that lens is as close to optically perfect as you can get. It means that there are no aberrations, color changes, geometric abnormalities that could be imposed by the lens. The only softening you see is the softening of diffraction. Sure, the picture is still softer at f22 than it is at f4, like it is in any lens, but that's from diffraction. There is no other image degradation that's imposed on the picture by the lens. So there's no astigmatism, there's no comma, there's no lack of flatness, there's no chromatic aberrations. The lenses in my list are like that. They're all diffraction limited. They basically are as good as you can get within the relatively narrow area that they're used in. Okay, so now you understand diffraction limited. That's going to be important as we go through this. All right, let me see. The lenses that I'm going to be talking about are almost all apochromatic as well. Apochromatic means they have been corrected basically throughout the entire visible light spectrum. By corrected, I mean any of the aberrations that are caused by light being refracted at different to different degrees as it passes through interfaces between materials like a lens and the air. Normally when light passes through like that, it tends to split up the frequency so that you get some fringing around areas of high contrast. Well, apochromatic lenses have asymmetric lens builds. They have lenses that are not spherical. They have lenses that have special low dispersion elements in them. The point is that the light is corrected again so that by the time it gets to your sensor, there is no fringing. The light is all the colors are hitting the same spot at the same time. Those lenses are incredibly difficult to make and incredibly expensive to buy. Most of the lenses on my list are also apochromatic. So that's an important feature to be aware of. Also, they have geometric abnormalities corrected as well, so that curvature of the field, for example, which is really typical with less expensive lenses, that means that the actual field that the image is projected on is not flat like the sensor. The sensor's flat, but if you're projecting a curved image onto it, then only parts of the sensor will be in focus at a given spot in your focal range. So what you'll end up with is blurry corners or a degradation of the image as you get to the edges. These lenses that I'm going to be talking about don't have that either. And that's going to all be important, because when you're talking about the very, very, very finest of lenses, they have to correct all of these things, and you start to understand why they cost as much as they do. I'm going to talk about the modulation transfer function in a minute. In fact, you know what? I'm going to talk about it now because it'll help you to understand as we go through these lenses why it's so important. If I can actually find I found a picture of a curve to show you, but while I'm looking that up, let me explain to you what modulation transfer function means. You hear MFT curve, and if you're like me, your brain freezes at the thought. Modulation is just contrast. If you just every time you hear the modulation word, just think they're talking about contrast, the amount of contrast. An image, before it becomes an image, it's a thing, right? Here's a thing. This thing has a certain amount of contrast. The writing on it has more contrast. It has black against the silver, and it would this. So you've got a certain amount of contrast in this object. When you image it, and the image passes through a lens, it will be a function of that lens as to how well that contrast makes it to your sensor. That is what the MFT tells you. It tells you how much of the contrast in a subject is transmitted or transferred successfully to the camera. And that's the function. The camera's picture in relation to the real thing. And we talk about that using these curves. And I'll show you a curve, and I'll tell you the couple of things you need to know about them so that you can look at the curves of two lenses and instantly see which lens is going to perform better and where it's going to perform better. So let me see if I can actually track down that curve. Would you believe it's the very first thing on my screen? Let me get that stretched out a little bit. So this is a fairly simplified notion of what the modulation transfer function is. But this is where here at the bottom it says modulation pattern. That is how the contrast looks in the real world. And on these graphs, they have the contrast going from large, soft, rounded objects, which are fairly easy for cameras to see, to very close together, sharply defined objects that are very hard for a camera to see. Now, what the captured image shows is going to be fairly similar on the left, and at the very, very far right, it's not going to be similar at all because the lens cannot deliver an image with that much detail to the sensor. This is actually measured normally in line pairs per millimeter. That is how close together lines can be before the camera can't see them as separate lines. And up here, up the side, is that transfer function we've been talking about. A transfer of 100% means everything that's going on in the world that the camera is pointing at, your lens can accurately transmit it to the sensor and the sensor will see it. That's what an MTF of 100% is. No lens stays at 100%. As you get to more and more detail in the image, eventually even the best lens is going to start to drop off. So here are the things you need to know. The higher those lines stay, and you'll see that there are two lines. There's a solid line and a dotted line. I'll talk about them in a minute. But as long as the line can stay towards the top of the graph, the better it is at resolving detail and the better of a lens it is. Simple as that. The dotted line and the solid line are measuring two different things. They're measuring how the resolution, or how the modulation transfer function, I guess, changes whether you are moving out from the center of the lens or across tangentially across those lines coming from the center of the lens. Don't worry about that so much as the fact that if the solid line and the dotted line are separated by a large space, that's bad. That means your lens probably has astigmatism or field curvature. The more closely the dotted line stays to the solid line, the better corrected the lens is. They never touch. They never live in the same space because tangential variation is always going to be more than it is in the radial orientation that's tested. So don't worry about that either. The bigger the gap between the solid line and the dotted line, the worse the lens, and vice versa. They're the only two things you need to know. Don't be afraid of MTFs. If you get an opportunity to look at an MTF, to evaluate a lens against another one, look at it. by all means. And it will usually not be a single graph. It'll be a set of graphs that will show you the performance of the lens when it's wide open, and then the performance of the lens when it's stopped down, usually to about f8. And you can compare then that camera to the other camera, and you can see, oh, the lens, I meant to say, you can compare the two lenses and say the second lens, oh look, it's a wide separation between the curves, shows a lot of astigmatism at f8 or whatever, and you'll know whether or not that first lens is really worth twice the price of the second one. It's a very useful tool to have. Don't get bogged down in the details, and there are lots of details. Remember those two facts, and you'll at least know what you're looking at. Contrast is modulation, okay? All right, so what are these lenses? Remember, I said no microscope objectives and no camera lenses. So if you want to toss in your 2 cents worth about the lenses you think should be on this, then please do let me know, and because I can certainly change this list. I have got some pictures of each of these lenses so that I can show you what they look like. If you think I sound a tad nasal this evening, it's because I have a cold, or had a cold. It's better now, but it was pretty miserable the last couple of days. This is the first lens on my list, and it's embarrassing to say this, but the reason it made my list is because I had said I was going to list 10 lenses, and yeah, I'm not excited about this lens, and it's not even the right picture. This is the Kowa LM50HC, 50mm f2.0 lens. I like a lot of these. It's an industrial lens. It's a line scanning lens. It's made for photographing things like printed circuit boards and flat screen televisions, looking for errors. This one is not really, it's not a great macro lens. It performs really well wide open, and they're not that expensive. This is the f2 version, and this one is actually optimized for near infrared, I believe. But the f1.4 costs about $1,000. This one's about $250. Very specialized. You don't see them very often, and yeah, it's the least desirable of the lenses on my list. The second lens is quite a bit, and everything from there on is quite a bit more desirable. This is an older lens from Zeiss. You recognize what this is, or probably you can just read it from the top there. It's the S-Planar 60mm f4, which is a remarkable lens that has a shorter focal length than almost everything else we're going to be looking at. So it's not quite as well suited for macro, but this thing corrects for fringing and chromatic aberration completely, and it's one of the flattest lenses you'll ever see. So it has a very remarkable looking MFT and the curve, and this is a lens that it's hard to nail down the price. It's the Rodenstock APO, the Zeiss S-Planar. It's about I found some for $800, some for $400 that looked like they'd been beaten up, and a couple that were more expensive, but I don't think they were exactly the same. So yeah, it's a fairly rare lens, but I was surprised by how many were on eBay today. They're certainly out there. I don't know much about them. I'm sure that Joseph does, but we'll see. The next one is the Rodenstock that I was about to mention, the APO Rodagon. This is the D model, and it's a 75mm f4. Now, this is one of the many times that my computer had a meltdown because it got so confused between this and an f4.5 that they also have that's nowhere near as nice or as useful a lens as this. The f4 is a very highly regarded lens. It's very high quality, very finely tuned, with extraordinary resolution and contrast, and it's really, really good for macro photography. It is an enlarger lens, as you can tell by looking at it, but it's hard as heck to find, and when you find them, they are really expensive. I've found these for let me see, as low as $1,000 and considerably higher than that. If you accidentally get the 4.5, you can buy them for $100 and $150. So you've got to be really careful. There's a lot of difference between the way that the two lenses perform. But it's incredibly flat, incredibly bright. It's available, but so are a lot of other Rodegons that look like it. So be careful if you're buying one. The next one is an interesting lens because it kind of overlaps with a bunch of lenses that I'm going to be talking about later in the list. It's not, though. It's a different lens. I'm referring to them as different. I'm talking about the Rayfact 105. Now, those of you who know about exotic lenses will recognize this as looking very much like the printing Nikkor 105. And it really is the printing Nikkor 105. This is made by Toguchi or Tsugi. It's one of those two, Nikon in Japan. And it is very similar to the printing Nikkors. It's not the same, though. And it has different glass, it has different coatings. It has in fact, it has the glass that's used in the printing Nikkors that I'm going to be gushing about later on is no longer made. It's not legal to make it anymore because it's got poisonous elements in it, but that's a glass that was made by Schott, the German company. But now this has eco-friendly glass in it, and all the coatings, and it's a very, very fine lens. It's absolutely gorgeous, actually, and in many respects it performs identically to the 105 printing Nikkor, but they cost on the used market $3,000 at a minimum. But you can get a printing Nikkor for considerably less than that. So these are very expensive lenses. They're quite beautiful at 1:1, but the performance drops off quite rapidly when you're at any other magnification, and that's a point that will come up again and again as we go through this. Is some of these lenses are so carefully tuned to a given magnification that they really only perform brilliantly at that magnification. This is one of those. The printing Nikkor, by printing, by the way, I'm talking about printing film. These are the lenses that were used to make feature films where the prints had to be made by reproducing the originals, and that had to be done with lenses that were flawless. And these lenses are flawless. The images that they take have no chromatic aberration. They have no geometric aberrations. They're totally flat. The colors are absolutely pure. They are as close to flawless lenses as you can get, and they are expensive and they are rare. But these lenses are not going to be in the same category. But each of the 4 lenses, there are 4 focal lengths that the printing Nicors were made in. 75, which I have never seen on sale. I've never seen one for sale, period, anywhere. They're so rare. Then 95 millimeters, 105 millimeters, and 150 millimeters. They're all f2.8. We'll talk about them in more detail in a second, but I just wanted to make one point, and that is that the 95 millimeter lens is optimized for use at 2:1 or 1:2. So you can use it for half life-size magnification or twice life-size magnification by reversing it. But that's it. It's terrible at 1:1. Well, I say it's terrible. My friend Bud, your friend Bud, actually has that lens, and he was telling me today that it was working quite nicely at 1:1. So, it's I guess it's a function of the lens, the specific lens. The 105 is really only designed to be used at 1:1. It doesn't work anywhere else. As you increase or decrease the magnification with extension, the correction is lost and it's no longer magically clean like it is at 1:1. The most interesting lens of the lot is the 150, and seeing as that's my number 1 lens, we'll talk about that separately in a minute, but I'll cover the magnification of that. There's another Nikon lens at number 5. That is a strange lens. It's the APO EL Nikkor 105 f5.6, and I've just got to find it. There it is. I would dare say you, all of you, I'm sure, have at least one EL Nikkor in your collection, and I bet you've never seen one that looks like this. This is the old and new version of the APO EL Nikkor 105, and these are remarkable lenses. Now, you may have paid, like me, $50 or $70 for your first EL Nikkor 50mm f2.8N, which was a great price. You'd have to shell out $2,200 for one of these, at least, and I've seen them go for more. But they are incredible. The resolution across the entire image plane, and they have a huge image circle. So they cover a full frame camera with ease and are sharp all the way to the corners, but they're also completely free of chromatic aberration. They're completely free of both longitudinal and lateral CAs. They have no curvature in the field. They're pretty close to perfect, and they're pretty darn expensive. And I don't think I've seen more than one a year show up on eBay, and I'm always looking for them. But yeah, it's a beautiful lens. The one after it is similar in some respects. It's getting towards the really exotic stuff, though. It's by Schneider, and this one you may have heard of. It's used as a comparison lens in almost all these enlarger lens tests. This is the very famous Schneider Macro Varon 85mm f4.5. It's used in industry as a precision tool in fact, it was designed specifically to look at silicone wafers that were being manufactured, to look for errors on the tiniest of scales. So this is really designed for very high performance work. It's absolutely flawlessly sharp to the edges, has a huge image circle, and totally flat field. It's why macro photographers just love this lens so much. It's very highly sought after and extraordinarily difficult to find. They're really quite rare, and I haven't ever seen one for less than about $2,400. I guess from time to time they'll show up, but it's highly desirable. All of these lenses, by the way, they didn't make it into my list if they didn't have an image circle big enough to cover a full frame camera. And I talked about this, I don't know if I might have talked about this on Thursday. It's important to note that there's a difference between how big your circle of a picture is and how large the actual image circle that we describe is. One's just a circle of illumination. That is, when we say that an objective or a lens has an image circle of, say, 80 millimeters, that means that at 80 millimeters diameter, everything inside of that circle is sharp. It's sharp not just arbitrarily, but there is a measure of resolution that it exceeds. And all that's published in the lens's paperwork. So to have an image circle of 80 millimeters means that any sensor that will fit inside that 80 millimeter circle will get full coverage. Now, if you were to shine that lens on a blank piece of paper, the circle may be a lot bigger than 80 centimeters. But that doesn't count as the image circle. That just counts as the circle that light's getting thrown onto. The image around the edges is no use, and you don't want that included in the sensor. So you have to be very, very careful when you're evaluating a lens to make sure it's actually going to cover your sensor. To cover a full frame sensor, you need a diagonal image circle of at least 43 millimeters. If it's less than that, it's not going to be covered. It might have light all the way to the edges. It might look like your subject gets to the edges, but when you look at the edges, they'll be really soft, and that's what you've got to be careful for. Okay, so we're up into. There are two lenses on my list that are particularly fascinating and just really especially interesting and highly desirable. The first is one that I don't think actually exists in the real world because I cannot find one. Thanks to Robert O'Toole for letting me steal this photograph to show you guys. I honestly didn't realize I'd done that. But this is the Magiro Jenison FLO530. It's a 110mm f4 lens that has a very, very cool feature on it. And that is, it's called a float lens, and it has an extra ring. You can change the aperture, and you can also, well, you can't change the focus. There's no internal focus on the lens. You have to focus it by moving it. But you can use the other ring, and you must use the other ring, to change the position of the internal elements of the lens at each aperture setting, so that the aberration correction is tuned for that aperture. Let me explain what that means. Normally, when you use one of these exotic lenses, it performs best at an aperture. Almost always it's wide open for these lenses. So say 2.8. It's best at 2.8. Anything other than 2.8, it degrades. With these lenses, if you wanted to stretch the depth of field a little and get more of the subject in focus, you could drop the aperture to f8, and then you could use this ring, this float ring, to change the paperwork with the lens tells you where to position the ring for each aperture, but you can change the arrangement of the elements within the lens so that perfect control of geometric and color aberrations that you get wide open, you also get at f8. That makes this lens incredibly valuable, incredibly rare, and impossible to buy if you're a macro photographer, because they just disappear just like that. I have no idea how much they cost, because not even Robert O'Toole knows how much they cost, and he has 3 of them. I don't know where I'd go to get one. I have tried everything I could think of, but they have a huge image circle. It's about 80 millimeters, so they cover medium format even. And you can change the magnification, useful magnification, between 1 to 2 all the way up to 3 to 1. So in that range you can use this lens, and you have an incredibly sharp lens. I've been told they're reasonably priced. Maybe Joseph will know. I'm not going to stop to look at the comments just yet, but in a little bit maybe I'll do that. Let's move on to the next one in line. Here's an unusual one. I chose this one for a little bit of variety. My pointer won't work. It's the Nikon AMED. It's actually a large format camera lens. It looks ancient, doesn't it? Well, it is ancient. They've been around forever. They're normally used in large format photography. They cost anywhere from $1,200 to $1,500, something like that. Sorry about that. They're beautiful lenses. They're one of the few lenses that you can use at extremely close-in distances, and that's why it's so popular with macro photographers. It's a fairly long focal length, 210 millimeters, but it's very much well known for its complete apochromatic correction. The entire visible wavelengths of light are corrected. Nice, expensive, but it's not nearly as expensive as the next to last lens in the stack. This, you aren't seeing the picture. I'm okay, guys. I got the message. You want to see the lens, not me. There it is. I'm hoping you're seeing that. If there's something else, Bud, you need to tell me. Send it as a text. I can't actually stop and answer the phone right now. So this is the lens I was just talking about, the AMED from Nikon. It's rare and unusual, but it's cool. Large format lens. So I was getting ready before the phone rang to tell you about one of the really coolest lenses on this list. If I can find my picture of it. It's also, strangely enough, by coincidence, made by Cambo, the same company that makes my new camera stand, and it costs almost as much as that. This is the other float lens that I've listed, and it's the HR Digeron Macro, but it's made by Rodenstock. It's actually branded by Cambo, but it's made by Rodenstock, and it's a 105mm f5.6 float lens. So it also gives you the ability to change the aperture, and then using these cards that you download from the company, then you photograph the card or look at it through the lens, and it'll tell you exactly for any given aperture where you need to set the float ring so that your aberrations are fully corrected. This little puppy, and it's not that big a lens, not that that would make any difference, costs almost $7,000 new from B&H. But boy, it's actually designed for use on medium and large format systems, but it is so incredible in terms of its resolution and sharpness that it is one of the most highly sought after macro lenses. It's fantastic, and the floating element means you get the same incredible performance across the whole variety of focusing distances that you can use. These are really pretty rare. I was shocked see them available on B&H. New, but they are. I have not yet seen one on the used market though. So that leads us to the last lenses that I have, and that's the ones that we've already partially discussed. The wonderful printing Nikors. I am going to show you a few of them. This is the 95. This is the lens that is best used. Well, it's designed to be used between 1:2 and 2:1, and is less exciting at 1:1 in the middle. But it's an f2.8 lens. It's bright, it's flat, it is totally corrected across its entire range, and it's sharpest wide open at f2.8. I don't think people use it much more closed aperture than that. This one takes a few specialized adapters to fit it on most systems, and it's a fairly big lens, but nothing compared to the one at the other end of the spectrum, which I'm going to show you now. The 150 is probably the most desirable exotic lens in the world right now, for several reasons. Even though some authors say that this lens is sharpest at 1:1 and should just be used at 1:1 and wide open, it's actually, other authors have said that it's equally high performance at all magnification ranges, and that you can use it anywhere from 1:4 up to 4:1, which is a huge range. I'm not sure I'd find out where it was sharpest and I'd just use it there. But this lens is gigantic. This is actually Mike Canfer's lens, who took the picture and let me use it for the cover of the live stream this evening. But these lenses are really, really amazing. They're extremely rare. You can go on eBay and you will find 95s and 105s. Most of the time you'll find a lot of Rayfacts, but you won't find many of these original 150s, and you'll never find a 75. So I have no comments about that one. But this lens, when it's in its pocket, when it's at its sweet spot, being wide open and at 1:1, there is nothing. There's no better correction in a lens. It is the standard by which all other lenses are measured. Really, they're expensive. The smaller 95mm and the 105 can often be found for $1,000 to $1,500 respectively. This lens almost never shows up less than $3,000, and I've seen it in excess of $6,000, and that's for a lens that is ancient by lens standards. This thing has been around forever. I think they stopped making them in '77. That actually sounds wrong. It must be later than that. But there is a version of this lens that's similar, that I was telling you about. The Rayfact, also made by Nikon, is a very, very high-performing lens. In many respects, it's similar. It has coatings that this lens doesn't have. They weren't invented back then. But this probably has the better glass. It's hard to say when you look at comparisons between the two lenses. They are both so high-performing that it's a little difficult to say that any one of them's better than the other. I would be perfectly happy with either of them, but yeah, that's why I'm trying to sell my camera stand that I haven't even picked up yet. So, any questions about these lenses and why anybody would be interested in buying one? You don't buy these lenses as an alternative to a macro lens. A macro lens may not be as sharp. It may have a tendency towards chromatic aberration at the edges. It may not have a completely flat field. But it also lets you shoot across a whole range of f-stops, at a whole range of magnifications, depending on the lens. It lets you do things that these lenses don't. These lenses do the one thing they do close to perfectly, but they don't do anything else. And when we're early in our macro experience, we want something that is more versatile, something that we can use outdoors, something you can use handheld. You can't do that with any of these lenses. They're not made to be used handheld. They're not made to fit directly on the camera. They're not made to be carried around outside, that's for sure. And they're expensive. You wouldn't want to be bumping them or dropping them. So definitely the lenses I'm talking about here are for people who've already got the nice lenses and they use a macro lens, but this is for those special occasions where your picture has to be absolutely perfect. And I don't own one, as I've told you, but I imagine if I ever get one of these lenses that I will start looking for subjects that are the right size to shoot with it at its perfect settings, so that I don't ever have to worry about having a versatile lens. So there you go. It is a stunning lens. They all are. So what is your idea of the perfect lens? I'm going to see what people have come up with in the comments. And I said I was wrong to ask you what your idea of a perfect lens was. This isn't about what the perfect lens is. This is about exotic lenses. A good analogy would be exotic cars. I once, back in my former life, I had an exotic car. I had two cars. I had a car that was for driving around in. It had 4 doors on it. People could sit in it. It was quiet and comfortable, and had a nice radio in it. And that was my driving around car. And in a fit of madness, I bought an exotic car, a sports car, that I could barely fit in, and it was uncomfortable and noisy, and gave me back problems and a headache. And yeah, I hated every minute of owning it. Could not be happier than when I sold it. So when you're buying an exotic product, it usually is for a very narrowly described use. And if you don't have that use for it, don't buy it. And in the case of these lenses, yeah, I think that it's for the person who wants to explore how far they can take resolution and sharpness and clarity and flatness of field. It's where nothing but the best will do, and you're willing to spend the money. And just like with the exotic cars, using these lenses can be temperamental. A lot of them need fancy constructed hoods to prevent flare. A lot of these lenses can be terrible for flare because they're not designed as macro lenses. They're lenses that are normally used in a strictly controlled environment, in industry where they control all the light. I mean, they're usually being used in fabs and other settings where there is no stray light. Anyway, let me see. Well, Russ thought it was an interesting discussion this evening. I'm glad. I certainly thoroughly enjoyed researching it. A lot of interesting stuff came out. I wish this is the kind of thing I'd like to sit around and just chit-chat about for a couple of hours, because there are so many nuances in each of these lenses, the things that they do well. But yeah, the trick is to just keep going to thrift shops, and one of these days somebody's going to put a box of Rodagons out for $5 a piece, not knowing what they are. Maybe the same guy that sold that Cambo camera stand. You never know. The Fujinon 18mm macro is an amazing lens, but I could swear if a if a stack goes on for a longer time, the focus begins to change a bit. Ooh, yeah, that would be... I'd need to know more about what you're doing there, Borderland. That does sound odd, though. Russ said, don't forget to hit the thumbs up if you're still awake. Then it would be much appreciated. All right, so I'm not taking the hint. You can't see the pictures, just my face. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I'm going to blame it on the cold, though it has absolutely nothing to do with the cold. I can't breathe through my nose or parts of my mouth. It was better this afternoon, but whenever I talk non-stop, it gets worse again. Have a look at the old Tamron 90. Yep. And, I'm going to... Actually, that older version of the Tamron 90 is one of the lenses I'm going to be talking about on Thursday. That's going to be a very different kind of presentation. That's lenses that you can pick up for next to nothing compared to these lenses for peanuts. And they're good lenses. In order to make the list for Thursday, the lens had to be affordable, available, usable, and meaning it would fit with a modern camera, and cheap. Well, that's what affordable means, isn't it? And have good performance. Take good pictures. You know what I meant. So you'll be surprised. Some of those lenses will surprise you, I think. And we haven't done that in a while. So there's a lot of the new stuff that's out that I think is on the list that we haven't talked about before, which is good. David Brown's watching yard sales for darkroom equipment to find some kind of glass or other. Frosted glass, that type of thing? Yeah, well, I'll look around and see if I've got any. David Brown's got the EL Nikkor 75 F4N. That is a different lens. Yeah. That's not one of the exotics, but you're getting close on the numbers there. Can these lenses be used on a normal camera? Yeah, they can all be used on a normal camera, but they need adapters, and some of them need a fair amount of separation. So you need bellows, extension tubes, and some kind of a helicoid. But yeah, you do need to be able to adjust your lens to sensor distance in almost all of these. That's how you set magnification. But yeah, once you add that element in the middle, they all will go on a camera. Most of the time with lenses like these, I would use bellows so that I could adjust them finely to the distance I needed. Borderland Pepper says that they look like very specific tools. They are exactly that. They are very specific tools, and just like a hammer is a moderately specific tool. It's not very good at sawing wood. That's why they call it a hammer, and that's the same with this lens. A 1-to-1 printing Nikkor. The 105 is just not a good lens at 2-to-1. It just isn't. You can extend it to 2-to-1, but you get some aberrations because the correction is not tuned for that. The one lens, the one kind of lens I've never tried, never had my hands on, but really ever since Joseph brought it up a few months ago, it's redoubled my interest in it. I really want to get my hands on a float lens so that I can use the tunable correction of aberrations, and that would be incredible to be able to extend the usefulness of the lens with different apertures with that tunable correction of aberration. But I don't think Joseph was here tonight, was he? Which is a shame, because I know that he would have all kinds of thoughts about this. Let me see. What lens do you have, Borderland, that you feel privileged to have? I didn't see. Well, I'll have to go back and read. I'm reading backwards, typically. That's not very good. Robert Daniels was asking, who is here for lenses with greater fidelity? Well, I think at the end of the day, we all are. And these are the lenses that that have no greater fidelity. When you look at their modulation transfer function graphs, they're pretty much straight across, and then they dip a bit at the end, just a little hockey stick at the end, and the two lines are almost touching. That tells you that these lenses are as good as they can make. In other words, diffraction limited. It's 901. I have to go and blow my nose, or my head is going to drop off. So, yeah. Thanks for coming, and I will. Bruce, it was good to see you. I'm glad you made it, and same to Anaphylaxis. Glad you made it. Yep, I'll be back on Thursday. Then I'll be in Wisconsin. If you want to come with me, I could use the company. Otherwise, I'll be back the next day, and we'll be doing After Stack on Saturday. So yeah, busy week ahead. Don't forget these books. Thank you to Susan again. The Lives of Moss, The Lives of Beetles, and The Lives of Fungi. Awesome books. But get the Beetles one. That's the one that you just are going to love. All right, guys. I'll see you in a couple of days. Until then, stay safe. Be well. Have a good evening.